To self-launch, again, aileron disconnected, failure pre-flight inspection, self-launch engine failure, engines fail. So along those lines, we've got to be prepared for eventualities. What could go wrong if you're taking off to the north? Where are you going to go? Where are you going to be able to set the glider down? We've got several different opportunities. Low altitude, we've got the upper field to the right. A little bit higher, we could go straight across the creek. If you've got enough altitude with the correct wind, you can make that turn around and land downwind. Going to the south, a little bit more difficult, fewer options there. But we do have a field across 311 to the right. It's an uphill field. It does have a fence that runs across that. So that's worth paying attention to as you're towing out. You've got possibility of getting into a field on the left. A little bit higher. It's on the Overland Road. And a little bit further out, you've got a couple of fields down along 311. But ultimately going to the south, not too many options, and when we're going towing to the south, we typically are at fairly low altitude. Tow signals, you should be familiar with those, particularly the difference between release now, wing waggle versus a rudder waggle, spoilers out. In free flight, during 2008 there were 6 mid-air collisions. We've already talked about one that occurred during 2009 up at Boulder with the Pawnee and the Cirrus. In 2008 there was another mid-air with a tow plane and the glider that it released, turned into one another. Of all the close encounters I've had flying sailplanes, most of them have been in thermals. And when do you have a close encounter or something that really surprises you in a thermal? Typically not when you're flying into the thermal, because it's really easy to spot those gliders that are circling. It's when you're in there and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you've got a glider a few feet above you. 2 instances, controlled flight into terrain, ridge flying. And of course we do quite a bit of that out here. Wind and sink. Wind and sink is going to get you into trouble when you do not have a plan B. There are so many places that we can fly out here, and there's nothing worse than flying down a ridge, watching the glider on the wrong side flying into a forest with no options. So keep in mind what your plan is, and if that plan doesn't work out, where are you going to go? Sharing airspace, Hawkers and 29s don't share airspace well, and of course we do have jets flying over Newcastle going into Roanoke. Which brings up see and avoid, which is what we have to rely on to avoid mid-air collisions. Basic concept is you've got to be looking for traffic outside of the cockpit. You cannot be focused inside the cockpit. And if you're going to effectively scan for traffic, you have to do so in the right way. Physical obstructions. Seat location, wings, being in the back seat of the K-21 or worse, the Atlantic, you have very few, or you have a lot of obstructions. And that's why when we're performing maneuvers, we do clearing turns. Psychological or physiological issues, not psychological. Blind spot. What is the blind spot? When you focus at distance, there is actually a blind spot that can hide an aircraft at reasonable distances. Empty field myopia, where you are looking at a clear sky and you end up, instead of focusing at the horizon, you end up focusing fairly close, so you cannot focus and pick out the aircraft that may be coming towards you. And distractions, paying attention to something else. Maybe circling on the ground if you are tooling around over town and want to circle the house a few times. Active situational awareness. Typically when we're flying sailplanes, we've got a lot of other sailplanes that we're flying with, so it is very wise to pay attention to where those other sailplanes are. Particularly if you're in the local area, you see a tow plane taking off with a glider on a training flight. Where is that tow plane going to be 3 minutes from now? Where is that sailplane going to be a few minutes from now? maintaining that situational awareness of where everybody else is that you know of in the air. That's going to keep you out of a lot of trouble. FAA defines some known hazardous areas within 5 miles of an airport, approaches to major airports, which also includes Newcastle, going into Roanoke, nav aids, reporting points, Victor Airways. And for glider specific, we've got specific areas in our local areas, such as the bowl, where everybody goes to find that last thermal before you head into Newcastle. Normal tow pattern, which ends up at the bowl. Cumulus Qs and thermals. If you have a Q, well, there's a good chance if there are other sailplanes in the area that they're probably going to be heading towards that to circle and thermal. On a ridge, that concentrates our traffic, and typically on a ridge, we're flying at high speed. We might be flying at high speed in opposite directions. So as you are flying along that ridge, oncoming traffic is going to appear and approach very quickly. If we are flying tasks, we've got turn points that concentrate traffic, start and finish cylinders. Any others that I missed? So how do we keep an eye out for the traffic? How do we do that effectively? Well, the thing that we have to focus on is not spotting the traffic, because we can only focus on a very small area at a time. We have to rely on peripheral vision, because that peripheral vision is what picks up the movement, and that's likely going to be the first indication that we have an aircraft in the area. Proper scanning procedures. We want to scan in sectors, typically 10 to 15 degrees wide. Stop in a sector, focus for 2 to 3 seconds at the horizon, and then move to the next sector. We don't need to be scanning high and low, because typically above or below 3 degrees to the horizon, traffic in that area is really not going to typically be a factor. It's the traffic that is right on the horizon that's most likely going to converge on us. And bottom line there, empty field myopia, remember to focus on distant objects. Once you spot that, then you have reaction time that's built in, and FAA study indicates that typical reaction time is going to be about 12 to 14 seconds between the time that you spot an aircraft and that you identify that it's going to be an issue, and then figure out how to respond to that. How far does that aircraft travel over 12 seconds? The table that I put together here shows that at 125 knots closure, 14 seconds, aircraft's going to cover about a half a mile. If you've got 250 knot traffic below 10,000 feet, well, traffic could travel a mile in that time frame. And of course, if you're dealing with military aircraft on low-level routes that are in the area, they could be going quite a bit faster than 250 knots. What does a military T-33 look like at a half mile? A mile? Pretty small, pretty quick. So what we're really looking at is you really don't have many opportunities to spot converging traffic. Ridge soaring. As we are flying the ridge, rules of the ridge, remember as you're approaching, converging head-on, aircraft turn to the right. If you have your right wing on the ridge, you can't go very far. So if you have your right wing on the ridge, you have the right-of-way. Aircraft that are left wing on the ridge, typically heading south on a standard ridge day, give way going out upwind. Reversing turns. Reversing turns are always going to be away from the ridge. So what does that mean? If you're following somebody, they make a reversing turn. If you're flying outside of them, they could well be turning into you. So being above and outside an aircraft, following along on the ridge, very dangerous position. Brings up the point of communicating with the people that you're flying with on a ridge. If you are flying on a ridge and you're preparing to turn, it doesn't hurt to get on the radio and say, Romeo 6 turning. If you're passing, and this is typically going to be a fast glider passing a slower glider, you want to move in between that glider and the ridge. Slow glider typically is going to be flying a little bit further out, should give you room. If you don't have that opportunity, you don't want to pass above and to the outside, Best place is going to be below into the outside so that they don't have an opportunity to pull up and